Hi guys, welcome to Learn with W3 Schools. My name is Dr. Zeeshan Bhatti, and today we're going to master the basic fundamentals of JavaScript in this JavaScript for Dummies course. We're going to learn all the basic fundamentals of JavaScript and understand how we use JavaScript. But first, why we learn JavaScript in 2022? Well, the JavaScript is one of the most versatile languages. It works for front-end, back-end, and full-stack development. It has a high demand and many companies around the world use JavaScript. Almost every single website needs to have a JavaScript and they need JavaScript for the interactivity. It has a large ecosystem, means there are a huge number of frameworks that actually depend on JavaScript. So you need to learn JavaScript in order to progress and become a full stack or full MERN stack web developer. And you will be using frameworks like React, Angular, and Node.js. As you know, I am already working on React.js and I've already posted several videos on that. But the fundamentals of JavaScript are already there, so you need to learn that before you go into and learn these frameworks. So let's start with the JavaScript and understand what exactly it is. Well, the first thing we do is we need to install JavaScript. So for our example's sake, we will be using Visual Studio Code. So you need to download Visual Studio Code from visualstudio.com. It's a very simple, easy setup. Just install it. Then you do need to install node.js. Again, you can find the node.js from the node.js org website. Again, the link is here. You can find it. Basically, Node.js allows us to execute the JavaScript outside of the browser, and you can get the output on the console directly. So you can use this command to verify the installation. So just simply type in node-v on your terminal inside the VS Code, and you will be able to find it. Next, once we have it, we try to enable the browser development tools within our browser. So if you are using Firefox, Google Chrome, or Internet Edge browser, they all have this developer mode. What this developer mode allows us to do is it allows us to ensure that we have a simple console that you can use to display the JavaScript on your browser. Okay, so this is where our goes. So to enable it, you can press F12 from your keyboard or Control Shift I, and it will enable this entire developer mode. Within it, we go inside this console, and here you can see the JavaScript output on it. So make sure you have access and enable this in your browser. But do keep in mind, if you are not using Node.js, JavaScript can directly run on your browser. You don't need to install any other thing other than just using it inside the VS Code. So once you do it in the VS Code, to see the outputs of some of the codes either on the browser or on the console, depends how you code with it. So to see the output on the console, we use a code called console.log. Console basically is an object that refers to that our console window that I just shown you, and log basically means I want to print an output on it. If you're coming from other languages, for example, Python uses print. If you are using Java uses system.out.println, or if C uses cout, means they print the output on the console. To do that using JavaScript, we use console.log. This console.log allows us to print the output on our console window. And then whatever you write here inside the inverted quotations basically will be printed on this screen. Okay, so this is how we print the output using JavaScript on our console window. Then comments. Now, why comments are important? Because comments are something that allows us to write the code that is ignored by the browser. It's code that is only interpreted by the well, it's interpreted by the compiler, but it is only for the developers. This whatever you write inside the comments doesn't get printed on the screen. Okay, so it's quite important for information, for notifications, for data that only the developer needs to know in the source code and does not needs to be printed on the browser. To do that, again, the double backslash for single line comment, or backslash static starting and static backslash for multi-line. So if you have multiple lines of comments, you can just simply use backslash static and then static backslash. Everything you write inside this will be completely ignored by the browser and no output will be printed on the console. So it's just like an information within your code that only the developer needs to know. Now, let's talk more about variables. What do we mean by variables? Variables are basically containers that hold the memory, hold the data inside the memory. So what this means is that we have a very simple memory block allocated and the data that we store goes inside this memory. So to do that, we create something called var. Var basically means a variable type. Again, in JavaScript, we don't define the data type itself. It's non-data type definition. We just define a variable, means that we are creating a variable and then we provide a variable name. So this becomes my variable name. Okay, means any name can be legal here as long as you don't start with a number or a space or any special characters like at the rate or $sign. They are not allowed here. Okay, then so this basically means, hey, let's create a variable, give it a name, any standard English name, is equals to and the value. So this becomes my value here. To do that, we just simply create this information, and then this will allow us to create a memory and store this variable inside the block. So now this means that I have a memory block. This is referred to as name. Inside it, I have a value called allies. So in order to use this value, I will be using this variable called name. So in order to print it on the console, I have used console.log, and see this, I'm using this variable name. So I'm accessing only the name, and it will print Alice on my output because it's referring to the memory area. Variables are quite important to store information in certain boxes, in certain containers. Okay, so in JavaScript, we use the var, we use let or constant. So when we define var, basically it means that it has a global or a functional scope. Okay, it's an older usage. Most commonly nowadays we use something called blocked scope. Means that if any variable declared inside of particular curly brackets inside a block, the visibility will be only inside this block alone. You cannot access this data outside of the block. Makes more sense in a professional sense. We'll do some examples later on. Hopefully we'll try to understand what it is. So but the basic concept you need to understand is variables that allows us to store the data in a memory, and then using that name we access that data from the memory. Okay, then if you define constant, constant is a type of variable that does not change. So if you want to create a fixed variable that has a fixed value and it doesn't need to be changed throughout your program, we specify it as a constant. Okay. Okay, so now about more let. Now let basically means that we're defining a let variable. It's same as var, but the difference here is that let has a block scope, meaning that anything you define inside a block will actually be declared only within the block, and the variable cannot be accessed outside. For example, again, if I have a variable called let and x is equals to 10. Okay, so if I declare this inside a block of code, then after the block of code ends, I cannot access this variable value here. It will create an error because this variable is only visible within the block. That's what basically we mean by let, and that's the key difference between let and var. Let basically means that we declare a variable, again as same case. In this case we have age, means that we create a memory block, and then inside this memory a variable value 30 will be saved, and then it will be referred as age. Okay, so now every time I need to access this value, I will be using this variable name called age. So this age will be accessed and it will print 30. At the same time, I can go inside here and I can say, hey, age 35. That means now I'm changing the value of age or updating the value. To do that, again, I will just simply use age. Now no longer need to use let because this variable has already been created. Memory has already been allocated to it. So now once I set it to 35, this basically means that this time instead of 30, this value will be replaced and now 35 will be saved in memory. Hence now if I have accessed the age 30, again it will print 35 because again this age will refer to this memory variable which now contains updated value 35. So you have a same variable name, and this variable can hold a value. You can change the value as you go along, and you will be using the same variable name to refer to this value. That's how basically works, as long as you use a variable name properly. Do always remember that the variable name must not start with a number. For example, 3h, this is a big no-no. The variable name also should not contain spaces. So for example, if you declare age my, this again will be an error because this technically is two words. So to resolve it, you can use underscore in the between, or you can use 3 in between. That's all valid. But if there's a space, this is again big no-no. So you can declare variables using let. Now also know that either let or var, they both are what we call type independent, means that you don't need to declare type. In this case, we are using 30 as integer. Okay, this is known as an integer, means a simple number. You can use just this 30. The type will automatically be assigned to this age variable by JavaScript. So if you declare a variable which is like 3.5, so for example, if you declare a variable which is 3.5, now this becomes a float value. Okay, in programming we call this as a float, meaning a decimal value here. If you need to declare a variable, you again will say let, for example, year is equals to 3.5. That's it. You don't need to specify it's supposed to be float. This will automatically be assigned and given to this year variable. Based on the type of data you have, its data type will automatically be assigned, and the memory will be allocated based on that. Okay, so the easiest thing to understand is you just use let age and give it a value. That's it. the type of that data will automatically be assigned using JavaScript. So now let's talk about constant. Well, constant, as I said previously, is basically a variable that is a fixed data type. This basically means that when we declare a fixed data type, its value cannot be changed. So for example, pi, we know its value is always constant, should not change. So if that is the case, we declare it as constant. Okay, so the value is absolutely fixed. You cannot change the value. You want to print it, you can print the variable value pi. Again, it will also create memory allocation. It will save the value as 3.14. It will give it a name called pi. Notice here I've used the capital letter. Again, perfectly allowed. Usually we prefer to use capital letters if it's a constant, just an indicator as a developer, as a convention that hey, this value is of constant type and it does not need to change. So if when you use pi, basically I'm using a constant variable here, but you can use it as small letters. Any variable rule basically apply. Then if you do try to change it, this will generate an error that cannot reassign a constant, means that I cannot change the value of a constant. So this will basically generate an error, so it's not recommended. So anytime you have to declare a fixed variable whose values should not change, you set it to a constant. Otherwise, let and var will basically work fine. Talking about data types, we have one common data type used called string. String basically is a type of data that stores alphanumeric values. Means usually if you have a multiple characters of data in terms of an alphabets, basically we use string data type. Okay, so whenever you use something within these double quotation marks, it becomes a string automatically. So every string data type uses these double quotation marks. Anything you write in between is of type string, means it's a multiple characters. It can have as many characters as you write. It can be alphabets, it can be numbers, it can be special characters. Anything you can insert inside these double quotation marks is a valid string data type. Okay, again you create with the same let or var, depends on how you want to work with it, as long as you use these double quotation marks. That's how we identify a string data type. Then you use this string variable and then print the value on the console. So it will print hello here because we have a complete string thing. Internally, it is also known as an array, or in other words, a collection of multiple characters. So it's going to store all these multiple characters in that particular memory area, and you use this greetings variable name to access the data from here. This string can contain spaces as well. Okay, so I can easily use, for example, hello world here inside the string. As long as it's within the double quotation marks, this whole is now considered as a string containing the space as well as exclamation mark, or for example at the rate sign, or any other symbol as you want. Okay, so anything you write inside double quotation marks basically becomes string. So always remember that anything you write with just like this, number is an integer number. If you don't give into inverted quotations marks, so for example if you just write hello without any inverted quotation marks, now this will create an error for us, because without inverted quotations this just becomes a simple character, and then this is not allowed here. To do that, you need double quotation marks. Only integer numbers, for example decimal numbers, okay, they are allowed to be without inverted quotation marks, because they are not string, they are individual number values. Okay, so to use these number values we don't need inverted quotations. For a string we need inverted quotation marks. Understand what exactly we mean by integer? Integer means any number form, any whole numbers, any number between 0 to infinite. Okay, or again and in a negative value as well, infinite. So any standard number without the decimal values. Actually that's the key thing, it needs to be a whole number. So you can write 1, 0, minus 100, all are considered as a numbers. If you use 3.5, now they basically are considered as a float value. So in a standard way, we call let, again we just use let, we define a variable name is equals to a value. Internally, JavaScript will automatically make sure it is of type integer because it has 100 value. If you use a decimal instead of integer, now JavaScript will automatically assign a float value. If you use double quotation marks, even you can use that, it will now become a string. So for example, if you declare a variable that is supposed to be, in this case, let name is equals to inverted quotation marks, and I can say to 100. Now, because we have used inverted quotation marks, remember the rule from the previous slide, this will automatically behave as a string. The difference, why we call this as a string and integer, you cannot perform arithmetic operations on a string. If it is a number, that means that I can easily say, hey, let me go for score plus 10. and this will do a mathematical addition. But if you define it as a string, now you cannot do the mathematical addition. It will join the two strings together. So that's the key difference that we want to worry about. So if you have to perform plus, minus, multiply, divide as a number, we don't use these arithmetic inverted quotations. So using these arithmetic inverted quotations will basically make it a string. So for an arithmetic number, we always just use a standard number value. That's how it's basically supposed to work. Along with integer, we have another data type called Boolean. Now, what does a Boolean mean? Boolean is a data type that holds only two type of values, either true or false. Okay, so it only holds either true, which is 1, and false, 0. It's a binary data type. That means it either holds to 1 or 0. Okay, only one value at any given time, which is either true or false. Okay, so you again define it as a let is a variable available, again a variable name. Any variable name can work from this sense. Then we have something called either true. So this means that this variable is of type true, and this is known as a Boolean. And then when you print it, it will actually print true. It's not a true in terms of string. Remember, this is considered as a Boolean data type. Internally in memory, it actually saves as a 1. So this means that this will save 1, which represents true value, and then if you save it as 0, it represents as a false value. We use Boolean data types in conditional statements. We'll talk about this in a moment. Conditional statement allows us to evaluate certain expressions and make a decision on that. And to evaluate, they need Boolean data type in memory. Means they need to know whether the data is either true, or condition is either true, or condition is either false. So we have this Boolean data type, which is again used extensively in programming. Now, going into more complex Java, we create something called functions. What do we mean by a function? Function is basically a block of code that performs a specific task. That's the basic definition of a function. Every time you have to specifically do a specific task, and that task needs to be repeated, you create a function. So for example, addition. Okay, if I have to do add and take two numbers, add them, for example x and y, every time I want to do this addition, instead of doing it again and again, I just create a function called add, and then I call this function pass it values. For example, change of currency from centigrade to Fahrenheit. Okay, so in order to do that, every time I need to do this conversion, I don't have to write the code and the functions and the mathematics again and again. I just create a function, for example convert, and then I've specified two variables, or just one single variable in this case. For example, I will just say, hey, just use this one variable x, and I give it a x value, and it will have a block of code that performs the task and gives me an answer, which is basically in this case centigrade to Fahrenheit. So this value will represent a centigrade value and Fahrenheit. So in other words, a specific task. That's what we say. A function is a block of code that does a specific task. The advantage is it makes it reusable now. Okay, so that means that every time I want to access this code, I will be able to reuse this function again and again and again and again. So every time I have to convert a function into a centigrade, I don't have to write the code again. I'll just call this function name. That's it. Okay, every time I have to do addition, multiplication, division, or any operation or any code I create, I execute the function. So how do we do that? We basically write a word function. Okay, so let me delete everything else. Where we go? Okay, so now how do we do that? Well, basically we create a word, we use a word called function. That's how JavaScript knows you're creating a function. Then we write something called function name, bracket start, bracket close, and then we provide parameters. There can be one parameter, there can be no parameter at all. Okay, if there's no parameter, then nothing, no need to write this. If there is multiple parameters, you write a parameter with a comma. So for example, p1 comma p2 comma p3, as many as you like. But if there are just one, you just simply write p1, for example, within the brackets, and we say, hey, we have a p1 parameter. Any name, any legal standard name is basically allowed. Then block start, block close. Do remember, in programming, the curly brackets are always represented and known as block of code. Okay, round parentheses are always associated with functions. Every time you see round parentheses, basically mean they are representing some form of function. This is a standard programming convention that nowadays applied on almost every single programming language. Usually square brackets are represented for array signs. Okay, means they are creating sets, arrays, or tuples that basically are represented with square brackets. More about arrays later on, but always these naming conventions, if you know them, the brackets, they just make your life so much easier. So block of code represents this multiple lines of code inside this block. Then you can write the block. This is how we create the functions. So we define a function. Now to use it, this is called function declaration, by the way. Okay, we call this declaration. Okay, it means we are declaring a function. To use it, we just call the function name. So we say function and then its name along with parenthesis, and if it has a parameter, so we pass it a value. In this case, for example, 10 semicolon. This is known as call. So we declare a function means we define the purpose of a function, what each function is supposed to do. Then to use it, now we just call the function name based on its name. So if this is, for example, add, I will just simply say, hey, call the add function, pass it x and pass it the value of y, which can be, for example, pass it 10 and 5. So add these two numbers together and it will return the one. So the logic of adding will actually be written here. If this is supposed to be convert function, we write the function name convert, pass it a value, and the block will execute. So this is declaring, means letting the system know what my function is supposed to do. But it will not execute until you actually call the function. It will not execute until you actually call the function. So always remember there are two parts to functions in programming, specifically in JavaScript as well. We declare a function and then we call a function. So this becomes my function declaration. This becomes my function call. Function call is dependent on the function name you have provided and the number of arguments you have provided. For example, in this case, it takes one argument. If you don't specify the argument here, this will generate an error. This will say, hey, hang on, I have a function name valid. These two things are absolutely valid, but this takes one argument here. However, you have not provided that argument here. So this takes an argument, but there is no argument here. This is missing. So this will generate an error for us. Okay, so this is where you need to be specific and make sure that you provide the same number of arguments. At the same time, if this contains multiple arguments, okay, so if your declaration contains multiple arguments, like for example function name p1, p2, p3, this means that now when I call this function, I must ensure that I have these three arguments as well. So when I declare it, I pass it value 1, I pass it value 2, and I pass it value 4. Okay, so now this p1, p2, p3, these values become, for example, let's just make it 13, let's just make it, for example, 24 to make it more convenient. So because this function now contains three parameters in its declaration, in its call, I also need to have three arguments. That's how we correlate to each other. Parameters, or this is something, again, I'm using the word called arguments. Okay, means that when we declare here, this is parameters, this argument actually is referred to this thing. Means when I have this function, it will take some input, it will need some value. So we are actually passing it this value here. So when we do that, it's actually using this value function here to call the data. So always remember, whatever parameters you have, you need to pass the same number of arguments here as well. So in fact, this arguments is actually referring to this thing. This word is actually parameters. So it means function has three parameters. It needs three arguments. Make sense? Perfect. Okay. So let's look at an example. We have a basic function that says, say hello. Again, remember the first key rule is we have to use the word function. We provided a name. Also the name of the function now. The rules apply same as the variable names. It should not begin with a number. Okay. It should not have a space. So for example, in this case, if I say hello, this means now there's a space here. This is not allowed. Okay. Starting with numbers 3 say again is not allowed. Make sure this, it does not also contain like at the rate symbol or hash symbol in the between. These things are also not allowed. It needs to be a standard alphanumeric, purely starting with an alphabet. The number can come anywhere in the between, and then there should not be any space. That's it. So we define as say hello function, bracket start, bracket close. Now notice there is no parameter here. Block start, block close, again quite important. So this becomes a typical syntax of a function. Inside it we write, hey, console.log say hello. Okay, so now this becomes my, what we call, just we said it, function declaration. So now we have declared a function. From this block to this block, function ends. Then anywhere in your code, after the function has been declared, you actually can call this program. So anywhere in your HTML document, in your JavaScript page, you can call this one time, you can call this multiple times as well. That's the advantage of creating functions. So when you call this function, so this was again declaration, this is function call. You can call this again, you can say, hey, say hello. So I can again call it. I can call it third time as well. So I can call this function now multiple times. So this is where the reusable code or the concept of reusable code comes into play. Imagine this function has 200 lines. Okay, so imagine it has some 200 lines. You don't want to write 200 lines again and again. It does a specific task. So then to do this task repeatedly, you don't have to write the entire code. You just call the function one time. You can call it two time. You can call it three time. Every time you call it, all those 200 lines will execute. Hence, you wrote this 200 lines one time and you can call the function multiple times. That's what code reusability means. So you're reusing your code within the function block. That's how we work with JavaScript. We call this function multiple times to execute our code. You can do that very simply by just calling the name. Always do also remember the parameters. Since it does not contain any parameter, if you do call it with a function, say, hey, say hello, bracket start, and then you pass it some value, for example, myself, my name, bracket start, bracket close. So what this will say hello to Zeeshan, but this will generate an error. It will say, hey, I have a function declaration that does not contain a function called or an argument called this Zeeshan. It doesn't take any string argument. Okay, it has no parameter here, so this will create a problem. We can override, we can declare another function, say hello, and takes an argument as well. So it can have two functions doing the same thing, but one taking an argument, one not taking an argument. Completely valid with that. Okay, let's do look at another example of functions now. So in this case, now we have add functions. So again, the first basic rule, we declare a function, we take an add. This time it has two parameters. Okay, so now we have specified two parameters here, A and B. Do also note the type is not defined. There is no need to use let or var in this case. Okay, because they are just parameters. So these variables will by default will be used as variables. There is no need to use let or var in this case. Neither you need to specify any data type for that matter. Then we have a bracket block start, block close, and this time we have used something called return. In previous example, we just used hello. That means it just prints an output. So we call a function, it does a task, prints the data on the output. That's it. This time we have used something called hello. What this basically we have used something called a return. Sorry. What this means that when this function will execute, it will give us a reply. Return will basically means it's a reply. Okay, or what we sometimes call an answer. So when this function will execute, this will give us a reply. This will give us an answer, and we need to receive that answer. So now what we have done here is we have said, hey, console.log, go and print output. We have called a function. So now notice I told you brackets represent function. So this dot log actually is a function itself because it has these brackets, and it takes an argument, which is again anything that you want to print on the console. So because it needs some data to be printed on the console, now we have nested, or in other words, incorporated the function inside another function, and we have said, hey, call this add 5 comma 10. So now this becomes my arguments. Okay, we call this as arguments. This becomes parameters, this becomes arguments. So when we do that, the first argument will be assigned to the first variable A. The second argument will be assigned to the second parameter B. That's how the value works. So in this case, A becomes 5 and B becomes 10. Why? Because this is first, hence the first value is assigned to the first, comma, second argument is assigned to the second variable value, second. That's how it works. Then when it performs its task, which is again, it reads the value of A plus B, does the addition. Now what this will do is it will go and return the reply. Return means wherever we have called the function, at the same place, after doing your operations, give a reply back, give an answer. Okay, so now we will have a reply. It's just like asking somebody to go and bring something for me. So when we give them a task, they go, they bring, and then they actually come back with that task and give you a reply, give you an answer, give you that thing that you asked them to bring. So means they are returning something in return as a response to your task that you've assigned. Okay, so that means we need to be there to receive the reply as well. So this is what it's doing as well. So let's look at this in another way. If I can simplify this in a simple sense, we can do this as well. So we can say, hey, let me create a variable answer is equals to, and I can pass it a value called add. So now this means if I do 5 plus 2 or 5 plus 5, now I have assigned it a variable. I've called a function called add. It will go inside this function, give it 5 plus 5, make it 10, and then give me a reply which I've saved inside another variable answer. And then I can use console.log to print this answer on the console. Similarly, you can use this return statement to return any form of reply. Okay, so return will mean that every time you use a function, it will return a value, and because it return a value, you need to be there to receive it. So we receive the answer in this case in another variable, or in this case directly inside a console.log. Makes sense? So here three things have been done. First, we have taken two arguments. Okay, so if you understand this, okay, so we have taken two parameters. Let me just erase everything here so that I can explain this in a better, cleaner way. Okay, so now coming back to the point. So the first thing, we declare a functions. Okay, so it takes this arguments or parameters. Then this parameter means that because it has two parameters, it takes these two parameters. Second step. Third, it does the calculation and then it returns a value. Returning means that it will give us a reply. Because it will give a reply, we have to receive that reply. So this is actually receiving a reply and returning to the log function. Okay, you can receive the reply in any form as you want. Just as I said, you can declare another variable x is equals to, and you can say, hey, add 5 comma 10. This means we call a function. This is again function calling. We give them the arguments. They will be assigned to a and b respectively. Because there are two arguments, the two arguments are given. The first argument will be assigned to the first parameter. The second argument will be assigned to the second parameter. Okay, so this is going here. This is going to the b. Once that is done, it's going to do the calculation. Then it's going to return the value. Then we save this answer and we assign it to the x. X here behaves like a receiver. It receives the reply, it receives the return value. I'm emphasizing on that because that's one of the common mistakes many students tend to make when they're working with functions and return. If it has a return, means it will reply. Because it will reply, we need to receive a value. In this case, I'm receiving a value and saving it inside x variable. Then I can use, for example, log x to print the value of x. What we have done here is that instead of using this x variable, I have said, hey, first call the add function, gave it two arguments that we want to print. Then where should the answer go? He said, okay, let the answer be inside the log. So whatever the answer is now will actually go inside the log function. Make sense? So this is what we call function inside a function, calling a function inside another function. That's how functions tends to work. Again, another simple function, a shorter way, or what we sometimes call an arrow functions. These arrow functions are quite important, especially if you're going into React.js. Okay, React.js extensively uses these arrow functions. These are considered as a one simple, shorter way of writing a function. To do that, actually, you don't need to write the word function at all. That's where the thing is. Second, you don't need to write the function name as well. Okay, you don't need to write the function name directly here as well. What you do is you create something called constant so that actually this data does not change. You write and create a variable like multiply, which behaves as a function name. So this multiply here actually is what we call a function name. Okay, so this becomes your function name. Is equals to is there. So it's just like declaring a variable, but the variable actually behaves like a function. Then we provided the parameters x and y. This is where the arrow function comes into play, is equals to arrow, and because this is an arrow function, notice there is no block here. Okay, you can use the block by the way. Then we say x multiplied by y. So what this, and see this, there's no return function here as well, but this will return a value. Okay, arrow function always has this thing built into it. It will return a value to us. So this is what we call an arrow function written in one single line. It will multiply, assign the answer back to this multiply value. So whatever is the answer of this, okay, whatever comes the outcome will actually be assigned to this multiplication value. Hence you can say, hey, multiply 3 comma 4. So actually you're calling the same thing. So this becomes my function declaration. Here we have declared it. This becomes my function call. Okay, notice the call is exactly same based on the arguments and the parameters. So x is assigned 3, y is assigned 4. Okay, because 3 is declared first and will be assigned to the first variable x. Then we have 4 will be assigned to the second variable y, same as that. But the only key difference now is there's no word function. We use a constant. We use the function name in a different sequence though. So there's no, instead of word function, we have word constant, multiply, equal sign, bracket start, bracket close. If there are no arguments, there's no need to write x and y. Okay, so if you don't need any parameters, there's no necessary, you can skip this. Arrow function is there, so instead of a block, we write the arrow function, and then we write the function block body. That's how an arrow function works. This is something, a shorter version as we call it, and is extensively used in JS frameworks. Now, talking more about JavaScript, we have something called control functions. These control functions or control flow statements allows us to control and make decisions within the system. This is where the true power of programming comes into play, where you start to make decisions based on user input or user interaction. We start to make decisions what's supposed to happen and what should not happen. So what we're doing now is we are using let score is equals to 65. So we declared a variable. We use something called if. This if makes a decision for us. The way we use it, we say that we have something called if, uh, and then we need a condition here. Okay, bracket start, bracket close, block start, block close. So condition is basically something that's quite important in this case. If this condition is true, okay, if this condition becomes true, only then this block of code will execute. Okay, if this becomes false, this will not get executed. The block is completely ignored. That's where the decision power comes into play. So in this case, for example, if my score is 85, I come here and I write a condition here. So this is what a condition looks like. We write a variable or any value. Basically, we need two values to compare, and we use this greater than sign. So this is basically referring to as greater than. This will become less than. We have something called greater than equal to. We have something called less than equal to, and we have something called not as well. Okay, and not equal to as well. So these are standard comparison operators that we need to use, or what we call them relational operators as well. So using these relational operators, we evaluate the relation or the condition, whichever term you use. Okay, so we say, hey, I have a score. If it is greater than 90, so this score contains value. Is the value greater than 90? If this condition is true, if this answer is true, this will return true to me. Okay, if this is false, it will return false to me. Now, where does true and false come from? Remember, we talked about Boolean data type. So this is a Boolean value. When the condition becomes true, it returns the value true. If it becomes false, it will return the value false, which is actually Boolean data type. If actually needs a Boolean value, it needs to understand whether the condition is true or false. If it is true, it will execute this block of code within its things. If it is false, the control will go to the else statement, which is written outside the block. So this is how it works. If the condition is true, the block is executed. Else, this block is executed. Okay, so now if the condition becomes false, this block gets executed. In this case, we have a very simple standard understanding of it. We say, hey, if this is true, execute this. Else, come here, if execute this in case of false. Anything you write within this first block is executed when the condition becomes true. If the condition becomes false, anything you write outside it in terms of else will be executed. Okay, so that's how the condition works. It's not necessary that you write else. You can just simply write if block here as well. Sometimes it's recommended that we need to provide the two things. So if your condition is, for example, in this case 85, it will print good. Why? Because the value is not greater than 90. Okay, so this condition becomes false. Because this becomes false, the control will go to the else statement, and the block within the else statement gets executed. Hence, it will print console.log. This gets printed. If I change this value to 95, Now what happens if I change it to 95? You would notice that, yeah, score greater than 90, this condition becomes true. In this case, it will go and execute this block of code. So if the value is 95, now this condition becomes true and the first block is executed. Because the first block is a true block is executed, this entire else block is now ignored. This will not get executed. That's the logic with it. So the basic simply setup, so we say that this actually makes a decision and then decides what to execute. So we put this inside this thing. Okay, if true, execute the if block. Okay, and then we go if it's false, execute the else block and then go away. In this case, the condition is, for example, the score is greater than 90. So if this is true, go here, execute the code inside the if block and then exit. That means the right side is completely ignored. If this condition becomes false, it actually control goes here, executes the else block and the if block is completely ignored. That's how a simple logic diagram works with this thing. So when we look at this code, actually this condition has a binary option, either left or right, which side to choose. If I choose false side, it will execute the else block and ignore this side because now the direction of the control flow has gone on this side. If I choose, if a condition becomes false, now it goes on this side. Okay, it goes on this side and executes this block. That's how if else statements tend to work. Similarly, we have something called control flow statements based on looping as well. Means that at numerous times we need to execute certain statements again and again and again and again. To do that, we use loops, which in this case is for loop. There is also a while loop. There is also something called a do while loop. Okay, the behavior of them is exactly same, only this how we write them in terms of syntax that varies. So here what we have done here is we have said, hey, I have a for loop, let I is equals to 0. So inside this for loop bracket, so now we have talked about for brackets as that they usually represent function, but here they are representing the statements as well. Okay, so we have a for that takes this basic statements. What these statements are, the first part is this thing, variable declaration. Okay, so we declare a variable here. Then the second part is basically what we call a condition. So this is a condition statement. The third part is what we call an increment statement. Okay, so it has a three-part statement within it with the semicolon. So that's the key aspect of it. The first part is variable declaration. So we declare a variable. This first part is executed only once. So when you declare a for loop, it contains, for example, let's say a for has part 1, it has semicolon, then it has part 2, again a semicolon, then it has something called part 3. Okay, now there's no semicolon here. That's how the syntax works. The part 1 part actually executes only one time. Okay, one time. And that's first, one time and first time only. That's how it works. This first part will only execute one time and for the first time. So that's where the initialization of the variable goes into play. So we initialize a variable because this will only get executed one time. What do we mean one by one time? I will explain in a moment as well. Then it checks the condition. Is the value of I less than 5? So I value, we just assign it to 0. So this condition becomes true. When this becomes true, console.log statement is printed. Okay, so now that means that part 2 means it checks condition. Check condition. So it checks the condition. If the condition is true, okay, so if it is true, execute the block. So this block is executed. In other words, whatever we write inside the block gets executed. So if the condition is check condition, if the condition is true, execute the block. Then it goes and executes the part 3. Do the increment. Okay, so then it goes and increments. So now previously i's value was 0. We said, hey, I is less than 5. This condition becomes true because with the value of I is at this moment 0. 0 is less than 5. Yes, it's a strong smaller value. This condition becomes true. It goes and executes the block and it prints on the console the value 0 because the I belongs to 0. Then as per this, it now goes back here, executes the increment part. So now it changes the value of I to 1. So now I here basically becomes 1. We say I is equals to 1 now. I now what it will do after doing the increment, it will go back and execute this step. Okay, so now from here part 3, the control will again go back to the part 2. It will say part 2 means check the condition I is 1 is I is less than 5. Condition again becomes true because I is 1 and 1 is smaller than 5. So now once this condition is checked, check the true condition, execute the block. So because the condition became true, it executed the block. Then again it goes back, do the increment. So now I becomes 2 because now it does plus plus. Again, plus plus means take the current value of I, add 1 to it and assign it back to I. Okay, means it will add 1 to every time you execute this plus plus, it will add one value to the current value of I. So it will take the value of I, add 1 to it and assign it back to the I. That's how increment operator works. So what's now doing is it's adding 1 to the I, checking the condition becoming true, executing the block. So it will keep on executing this statement. So it will 0, then will print 1, then next time print 2, then next time print 3, then next time print 4. So it will keep on printing the value until the value of I becomes 5. So when the value of I becomes 5, then it's going to say, hey, 5 is less than 5. Nah, this becomes false because they are actually equal. Because they're equal, this condition becomes false. So once this condition becomes false, okay, the control blocks exits. So the loop exits. Okay, so we say now exit for loop. That's how the cycle of this loop works. So the way or the logic is it will keep on repeating and executing this block of code. Whatever you write inside the block will keep on repeating until this condition becomes false. So this can go up to 5, this can actually go up to 55, this can go up to 5000. That means that this line will execute 5000 times. So by just writing 2 lines of code, you are actually printing 5000 lines of output. That's what looping statement does. Everything you need to loop around, everything you need to print multiple times with just small variations. We actually use these looping statements to execute it multiple times. Talking about arrays now. Arrays is basically a type of data that allows us to store multiple values in a single variable. We talked about previously that we have a single memory allocation, but this only stores one value with a variable name. Okay, so now what happens is that if we want to store multiple values inside this box, how do we do that? To do that, we use something called arrays. To create an array in JavaScript, we define an let or var or constant, depends on what you want to do. Again, a variable name is equals to, so instead of declaring a one value, we use block of code again. So block is there ending with a semicolon. What this means that now we have multiple values that we can use inside this block. To use the multiple values, we use something called a key value pair. A key value pair means that we define a key, colon, and its value. Hence, we refer to the value using the key. In other words, we declare variables inside an array. So this basically behaves like a variable, colon, its value. Variable, colon, its value. Variable, colon, its value. This behaves as a key value pair. Because we're using an array, we don't call them variables, we call them keys. Colon, its value. This value can be of type string because it's using inverted quotations, or integer because it's using simple integer variable. To print and to use this variable, we go and access the main array car. Dot is basically a connection operator here that connects the variable and its value. And then it says, hey, I want to access the brand value. So it's going to access and use the brand value for us. So brand information, in other words, the Toyota is printed. If I want to print the model, I will go and say, hey, print this model, which basically means I will say car dot connection operator, then use this model key here. So it's going to print the Camry value here. Okay, similarly, if I want to print the year, I will say car.year. It will print the year for us. This is how arrays work inside it. They form what we call a key and value pair. This is very important, and this is used very extensively throughout JavaScript. So by doing this, we are able to store multiple information inside a single array variable here. Now this behaves like a multiple data type, or a type of container that holds multiple values. Similar to an array, we create an object of an array. By creating an object of an array, we mean that instead of using the key and value pair, we define object arrays. Here, there is no key value pair. We say, hey, let define an array or define an object is equals to, we create bracket start, bracket close. Notice we have a square brackets now. So I did mention that previously we use square brackets to defining an arrays. So now it's creating a list of values inside this single variable here without the key and value. Okay, so we define value 1, comma, value 2, comma, value 3. Notice there is no key here now needed. So how do we access it? We'll access it by using an index number. So this number is now known as index number. Okay, so this will print the value of our items inside the list. So what's happening now is it's going and say, hey, I have a fruits square brackets, so there's no dot operator involved now, and then we just use this index number. This index number actually is behaving in this sense that every item here has a specific index number. So this will be assigned as 0 index, this will be 1 index, this will be 2 index. These numbers are assigned automatically. You have no control over these numbers. The first item in this array list is always starting from 0. Hence, if I want to print apple, I will be using fruits, fruits, the variable name, square brackets, 0, close square brackets. This will mean that I'm accessing the 0 item on the 0 index number. So the item on this 0 index number is going to be apple, so it's going to print the apple for me. If I use it as 1, it's going to print the banana. If I use it 2, it's going to print this cherry item. So this is how we print the list array items inside our JavaScript. Similarly, you can create array items of any type of data. So you can have integers. If it is integer, note please that there is no inverted quotations. Inverted quotations indicate you are using string. If it is string, you use inverted quotations. Also, if it's numbers or decimal numbers, you don't need to use inverted quotations here. This behaves as an objects and arrays within our JavaScript. We use key value pairs to define objects, and we define arrays or simple array lists using square brackets with values. Okay, so the values can come here. All this will basically mean that inside one single major container, now you have 3 values. By default, everything starts from 0. So apple will be stored in a 0 index. Then on 1 index, banana will be stored. And then on 2 index, cherries is stored. You can have as many items in this list as you want. So this can go for 0, 3, 4, 5, 6. The number of items in this array is again 3. Okay, so the length, in other words, of this fruits is 3 because it contains 1, 2, 3. But the index number, because it always starts from 0, it has 0, 1, 2. So the last item will actually be one number less than the total number of elements. Okay, so we use this n minus 1 principle. So if there have 3 elements, the last index is 3 minus 1, 2. So the last index is actually the 2 number here. So this index number, again using these square brackets. That's how arrays work inside JavaScript. Talking more about the control and how JavaScript provides interactivity in our HTML documents, in our web pages, we use events. So to control the events, we basically use certain functions that get executed when certain event occurs. Event basically means user interaction. By that we mean that when user clicks on a button, clicks any image, clicks on a link, that's an event. It moves the mouse over it, that's also an event. Keyboard input, that's also an event. So when we press a key on a keyboard, that's an event. So there are multiple different events that we can control using JavaScript. To do that, for example, in this case, we created a simple HTML button. We use an attribute called onClick is equals to, this is where the JavaScript comes into play. So now we have said, hey, show alert. This means that we want to execute this function. Then we use the script tag. To incorporate JavaScript inside an HTML, we always use the script tag, indicating that this is a JavaScript, this is an HTML part. So now here we have something called HTML. Okay, This is HTML. This script will basically mean we are using JavaScript. Once we are inside the script, we declare the function show alert, and then it performs an alert function. So alert is again another built-in function that creates a pop-up box. So every time user clicks on this button, it will actually generate this pop-up box. But how do we use it? We simply say, hey, on click, when user clicks on this button, execute this on click event. When the event is executed, the task that I need to perform is execute this function. So this will actually go and call this function. So this is function declaration. This is function calling. The function calling again takes no arguments because there are no parameters provided here. If I provide a parameter here, I need to provide an argument here as well. The same rule applies for the functions. So in this case, we have a very simple function that generates an alert window. This can be 2 plus 2. This can perform any single task, anything that you want to do. So using events, you can combine HTML events with JavaScript, and then you can trigger certain functions that perform those tasks for us. That's how event handling works within our code. It's very simple logic, very straightforward. So that concludes the basic mastering course of JavaScript. Okay, so this becomes the basic gateway of making you understand how JavaScript is working, what are its basic fundamental concepts. Obviously, this is not a whole detailed lecture. It's going to take a lot of time. I will be posting a video of letting you know in detail what are the all major topics of JavaScript. I already have a detailed videos on multiple steps, multiple sessions of JavaScript. So do check that out in my channel. I have most of the major JavaScript course topics I've already covered in my videos in previously. This was just a quick mastering overview. So I hope you do that. Now, the next step, where do you go from here? Is basically consistent and practice. So you need to find out various different projects that you want to work with, create and update. The more programming you do, the more coding tasks you do, the better you get. The best way to learn JavaScript though is to, in order to learn it, you need to practice. Understand the fundamental concepts, implement it into smaller projects. Don't try to create a whole new mastermind project. Just go for a smaller projects like converting Fahrenheit, adding values, creating simple calculators, simple tasks. What those tasks are, again, I'm going to post regularly on my channel. So don't forget to subscribe, follow, so you can learn JavaScript. I have already multiple lectures on the React framework using JavaScript, so that again you can follow along to master React as well. So that concludes the complete session today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you liked it. Anything else you want to learn, anything you want to learn, leave a comment. Let me know what you want to learn here, and I will be posting video on that. There is already, as I said, multiple JavaScript videos I've already posted on my lecture that go much more in depth of each of these concepts. So do check those videos out to master JavaScript completely. So this was just a simple JavaScript course, JavaScript for Dummies. So I hope you enjoyed it. This is Dr. Zeeshan Bhatti. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe my videos. And if you are interested in learning more, check out these cool videos that I have already posted on my YouTube channel. This is Dr. Zeeshan signing off.